Good, I forgot to say that to start the recording. I had it written down. Our speaker today is Reverend Bob Tucker. He's going to be coming to us through Zoom, so those of you in the auditorium here can see him, and the others can see him online as usual. Bob is retired after serving First Congregational Church in Houston after nearly 30 years. He and Maggie visit us usually once a month when Bob inspires us with wisdom and experiences. Bob was senior minister at First Congregational Church in Houston for many years. He was also interim minister at First Unitarian in Houston. He served churches in South Dakota, Minnesota, and Kansas. He and Maggie taught several years in Turkey, and he is the Executive Director Emeritus of the Foundation for Contemporary Theology. His topic today is Model for a Flat Church. So, introduce you to Bob Tucker.
Okay. Well, good morning, everyone. Great to be with you once again. The Greek word icon in Greek has entered into our vocabulary. Icons are ubiquitous on our computer screen. They're the graphic symbol images. You click on an icon and up pops a program such as Word or Pages. Click on an icon and an object such as a file opens. Click on an icon and a function takes place, such as the command to save or to delete. The word more familiar in our vocabulary is iconoclast, of course, deriving from the word icon. Actually, icon and iconoclast are church words, and they come from a particularly horrendous time in church history, in the 8th and 9th centuries in Eastern Orthodoxy. An icon is a picture of a sacred person or a sacred event, Jesus or a saint, in a mural, a mosaic, or a painting on wood, and is used as an object of veneration or a tool for instruction. The iconoclastic controversy was a ferocious debate on whether or not icons, that is, pictorial descriptions, could be part of the religious life. Church leaders were afraid that church members, worshipers, would focus on the art rather than on the object to which the art points. During the iconoclastic periods, with the right emperor on the throne, the makers of icons were sought out and very likely had their hands cut off. Now, that iconoclastic controversy has continued through the centuries, often in much less violent way. In this country, the Pilgrims and the Puritan traditions, those in that Congregationalists, Unitarian, Universalists, and Quakers, have buildings and worship in that can be seen in this worship space we have in Galveston. At First Congregational, the meeting house had only large, plain, not stained glass windows, absent flags, and even absent a cross. Well, so immersed was I in this kind of thinking that I was surprised to find myself becoming hooked on secular, non-religious forms of icons called models. Models are a staple in business schools and in corporations. So anyone with a business background will shake their head at why it took me so long to discover models, and they did. For me, the discovery started when I was again building the Church Stewardship Committee, vigorously working to obtain financial pledges to support the church's proposed budget. So quickly did the committee raise the money that they arrived in the following weeks anxiously pursuing the needed remainder. And here we I connected the fundraising with the 20 model that I have been reading about. Each year, the committee seemed to raise roughly 80% of the money quickly in a brief 20% of their time. And then they spent the following 80% of the time raising the remaining 20% of the money. And this was happening repeatedly every year. The 80-20 principle or model was an aha moment for me. It brought great clarity to what was taking place, and with some creative thinking, I learned to relax each year, knowing what was going to happen. Parenthetically, in my reading, I discovered that the 80-20 model had a name, the Pareto principle, named after its founder, an Italian economist, Vilfredo Pareto, who stated it, if you can believe this, way back in 1895. But my discovery and conversations with some business folk had them chuckling that I could be so dense as to have gotten so far in life without visualizing principles of and as expressed in models. Actually, from that point, I went overboard in making church models for every conceivable thing. I didn't realize it at the time, but I was following another principle. Give a child a hammer and everything becomes a nail. What I found is that models did two important things. First, they helped me understand a puzzling issue. And second, they were great for the impetus to move forward. Well, I settled down, and over my working years, the models that were most helpful settled in my mind, and I would pull up one at an appropriate time to help me deal with a person or an issue. Alas, that full mental repository is now a thing of the past, but a few models continue to linger on. This talk has caused me to revisit and revive that time of model building. And as I said, businesses use models extensively, whereas they are almost non-existent or a rarity in religion. One early and well-used model I formed was what I called the change trap, part 1 and part 2. The model is best explained through an example. In the summer before my second college start, I bought a portable typewriter, Smith Corona, and the book Typing in 24 Hours by Samuel S. Pepe. And over that summer, I taught myself 10-finger typing. Well, you know the result of going from 2 fingers to 10. Initially, it was a teeth-grinding frustration, and with frequent moments to give up. However, by persisting, in the end, I became far more proficient and a productive typist. You could have the next slide. Okay. And this is not unfamiliar to many of you. If you try something new, you become less efficient, the frustration level goes up, and in a group it can even be anger. But if there's persistence, then you can become more productive and more proficient. Oftentimes, in order to encourage myself in the middle of a new effort, I would draw this out. And if people were getting quite frustrated, I often would draw this figure for them as well. And it was a way of encouraging them. Not only would remembering this model keep me on track, but it also kept others. There's a second part of this change trap. It was a picture I kept in mind of Rare Rabbit and Tar Baby. The Tar Baby is in the Uncle Remus stories, and they were first published as far back as 1881. It's about a doll made up of tar and turpentine used by the villainous fox to entrap the rabbit. Following the inquisitive, sticky touch of the finger, the more rabbit tries to escape from Tar Baby, the more entangled in the tar he becomes. Well, that model kept reminding me to carefully consider the cost and consequences of important decisions. I could give a good example of not paying attention to that model, but it's a little too lengthy and actually a bit too embarrassing. The story of Tar Baby is an image that I wish that our national leaders, civilian and military, kept in mind before entering Korea and Vietnam and Iraq and Syria and Libya and of course Afghanistan. Another model I found very helpful was what I called the Wesleyan quadrilateral. If we can go to the next slide. It was derived from the writings of John Wesley, the founder of the Methodist Church. If you're going to consider an important decision in the church, touch base with broader considerations. Four important ones being tradition, experience, reason, and scripture. It can be altered for a Unitarian Universalist group who might not put that much credence in the Bible, but for example, might put Emerson in that place. The model is a reminder to consider important factors in any significant decision-making process. I also decided to try my hand at developing new visual models for religious beliefs as well. The church has a long and rich history of iconography. For example, the triangle symbolizes Trinity. A lion in stained glass reminds one of the Gospel of Mark. And the triple crown reminds one of papacy or the Roman Catholic Church. Well, I decided to start with a truly troublesome word, God. Actually, I ended there as well. I say troublesome because the word suffers from multiple definitions and is so static, so self-contained, so passive, indeed so malleable. It just sits there, does nothing other than gathering around it a never-ending debate. No wonder people have such trouble with that word. Now contrast that understanding of the word God and the one that probably resides in most of our heads with the words of Buckminster Fuller of geodesic dome fame. Okay, the next slide. And this is what Buckminster Fuller said. For God, to me, it seems, is a verb, not a noun, proper or improper. Is the articulation, not the art, objective or subjective. Is loving, not the abstraction love, commanded or entreated. Is knowledge dynamic, not legislative code, not proclamation law, not academic dogma, nor ecclesiastic canon. Yes, God is a verb, the most active, confronting the vast harmonic reordering of the universe from unleashed chaos of energy. And there is born unheralded a great natural peace, not out of exclusive pseudo-static security, but out of including, redefining, dynamic balancing. Naught is lost. Only the false and non-existent are dispelled. Oh, that's a very different view of God. It's one that is much more vital, that God is a verb, not a noun. And think of how that might change our mental picture as well as our discussions. Okay, the next slide. How do I try? Oops, somehow it's missing. Okay, I tried to put together a writing of the word God. And what I did was to put G and D and take out the O and put the infinity symbol so that God is expansive. The word anyway points to something that is expansive. One thing I tried to do with the word also was to find a G and a D that explodes outwards, but I couldn't find a typeface that included that. So the word God with an infinity sign in the middle of it rather than an O points to the undefinable, the uncontrollable, the uncontainable, the intractable, the insubordinate, the subversive, the defiant. That's quite a different view of God, but it follows more in what Buckminster Fuller puts for us. Well, giving up on beliefs because they were not very productive for me, I decided to move to something more practical, modeling the church. And modeling the church I was serving in Houston, at least I developed, is what occupies much of the rest of this talk. But I also believe because Galveston is also an egalitarian flat organization, it's applicable to the Galveston Fellowship as well. How does one draw a model of the flat, non-hierarchical church? Well, my business friends were of no help there. What they wanted to immediately do was to form a model such as they're used to in business, with figures or boxes piled up and connecting lines. We're all familiar with that. And even the simplest attempt to draw a flat organization generally incorporated a bit of hierarchy, as in the other picture here, of the minister, if no one else. Neither image though worked for First Congregational, nor would it work for Galveston, since both organizations are egalitarian and congregational in polity. Even as the senior minister, I often said that my ultimate power was the power of suggestion. There is no person who controls the life of this community. Leadership is rotated and shared. Not being able to find a model in any of the literature or in any of the people I spoke with, what came to rescue was the Camelot story, the story of King Arthur and the Round Table. Okay, the next slide. Well, it's not as, the circle should be in the middle, but I think you get the idea. The community was in the round table, and out from that community went the knights. They went outward, if on the right-hand side, helping others. For example, think of the widow being evicted from the housing that she had by the landlord. There was the fighting of dragons, and dragons roamed across the countryside. And then there was the searching for the Holy Grail, that is the chalice that Jesus used at the last meal. And this too was an important part of knights going out. When they came back on the left-hand side, They needed to be healed from their weariness and their wounds. They also did jousting in order to train for going out again by doing the battles. And there was a sense of purifying, that is, of making one worthy of going out and being a knight of the Round Table and searching for the Holy Grail. And the next slide. Well, I threw this in because I wanted to show that that round tables are not only used in the story form and in religion, but here's a political round table. And this was the round table at the time that Poland was moving away from being a communist country to being more open. And this was the gathering of the communist and other interested parties in trying to formulate a new a new election system for the country. Okay. And the next slide. What I did was try and put together a model for First Congregational. Now, this is 20 years out of date. I've been retired that long, but it was a way of putting together the activities, outreach of the church. And I'm not so much interested in the details of this, but to show how this model, by putting activities in to various parts, showed the whole life of the church. It not only did that, but it also becomes a means of reaching out. For example, under helping on the right-hand side, the first one is refugee resettlement. Actually, the church resettled 38 refugees, 28 from Vietnam, 2 from Poland, and 8 from Ethiopia. With the new refugees coming in from Afghanistan, this becomes a way for the church to say, we did this in the past and we can do it again in the coming future. Or given the fact that housing is still a problem, under justice, you'll notice that it says habitat houses. Well, the church built for. And it seems to me that if we wanted to get concerned, or if the church wanted to get concerned again about housing, it has a basis on which to step out and get involved in housing or build another habitat house. So a model then becomes not only a statement of where an organization is, but it becomes a springboard for the organization to step out in following patterns of the past, or even in new ways. One other change here, you'll notice that in spite of facing dragons, I put the word justice in. There was a theologian by the name of Walter Wink from Union Seminary in New York City, who wrote once that when Paul wrote that we are fighting not against human, but against principalities and powers, that has been taken as a way of saying that the church is also engaged in justice, and that principalities and powers in Jesus' time was the Roman Empire, and today it's Austin and Washington. And it's a responsibility then to, as members of the Round Table and reaching out, to work for justice. Okay, the next slide. Okay. Well, what I've been talking about up to this point is something in the past. That is the iconoclastic controversy back a number of centuries, and also in my attempt to use a model of the church in order to better understand what is happening in the church, and also for means for reaching out. But iconoclastic activity is not just taking place in churches, it's also taking place on the TV screens. And we have here a burning flag, we have a kneeling soccer player. And both are ways of protesting against the powers that be, the principality and the powers, as Paul put it. There was a strong reaction in the society initially to these, although I think maybe it's happened often enough that we no longer react the way we once did. But there's a reality to this. That is, the flag is not the country. I pledge allegiance to the flag and to the republic for which it stands. The flag is not the republic. The flag stands for the republic. And the Supreme Court, in its wisdom, has recognized this and said that flag burning is a matter of free speech. And the same thing is true as kneeling. How else does one protest what is taking place in the country? And this was formed as one form of doing it. Kneeling during the anthem is not an attack on the country, because it's an attack on one form of one icon, in a sense, that points to the reality. The Supreme Court back in 1940 actually had a ruling from the case from Pennsylvania in which school children were not willing to stand up and pledge allegiance to the flag. It was basically groups of Jehovah's Witnesses, and it became increasingly contentious, not only in Pennsylvania, but across the country. And 3 years later, the Supreme Court reversed itself and said that no one should be forced to speak things to put country above God, as the Jehovah's Witnesses were understanding this to be. And so we have enshrined in that case back in 1940 and 1943 a resistance to the imposition of the state on religious belief. Well, I come up with one more icon. We'll go to the next one, please. And this, of course, is familiar to all of us. It is the symbol of Unitarian Universalism, and it's universally recognized now. And it's a way of encapsulating, of pulling together of all of our important beliefs. The philosopher Whitehead said that real symbols have the power to change history. And I think that this symbol has been able to do that among Unitarian Universalists. It was actually put together not by a committee, and that somehow pleases me, but it was put together during the World War II, and a Unitarian minister was stationed in Lisbon to help refugees from Nazism escape to safe havens. And he asked a Czech refugee and cartoonist to design something that could be used for official documents, and thus an early version of the modern chalice came into being. Well, all of us develop certain understandings, theories, philosophies on how life works, how people behave, how family life should operate. In other words, each moment is not isolated from other moments. We find patterns, and whether spoken or formulated or not, whether written or not, whether drawn or not, we move into the future with these in mind. As a parent, we know what a child will say or do often. And as a child, we often know what the verbal pattern of a parent will be. And that's the problem with models. We can disengage our minds, slipping into neutral, and in doing so, close ourselves off to the nuances of changes in behavior. That's the danger of models. But the positive thing, that models give us ways of understanding the present and moving into the future. Well, there ought to be a model with an icon for how to end a talk, and perhaps I will work on that in the near future. I thank you very much for your attention.